Hey everybody, welcome to Con to Couch. I'm Mike from Hound Dog Media, and we're doing this show today because we want to try to bring some of the convention experience that a lot of folks aren't going to get from the current situation in the world today. And so we want to try to bring that directly to you on your couch. And with that, I will hand it over to Jack Clemens, our host for today, and he's going to be talking with Chris Kennedy and Kevin Eikenberry with Chris Kennedy Publishing, and hopefully one more guest on the way very soon.
Hi, guys. It's Jack. I'm going to be your host today for this panel. And I'm going to go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves. Chris, let's start with you.
All right. Hey, I'm Chris Kennedy, former naval aviator, elementary school principal, now science fiction, fantasy author, editor, publisher, just about everything, and head of Chris Kennedy Publishing.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Kevin Eikenberry. I am one of Chris's authors. I'm a retired Army officer, written now about 13 novels. 11 of them are published at this point. Mainly write military science fiction, but I've written a couple of other things as well. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. Chris, if our third guest joins us, we'll, of course, give her a chance to introduce herself. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about CKP, how it came to be, how long you've been going on, what was kind of the genesis of all this?
Sure. Started in 2013. They say 81% of people have a story they want to tell. That was never me. Never wanted to be an author, never wanted to do any of this. And then one day I had a story. And I ended up self-publishing it because nobody else wanted it. And it sold. And I said, wow, I need to do that again. So I did. Sold a few books and, attracted some attention. And some folks said, hey, you seem to know what you're doing, with this whole publishing thing. How about publishing me too? Okay, sure. Hey, how about me? Sure. And by the time I had, 5, 6, 8 people, all of a sudden it was like, well, maybe I better incorporate this thing and, figure out what I'm doing. And, I took hold and claimed ownership of everything that was going on at the time and have continued to grow the company. Even though I didn't necessarily intend to when I started, I definitely do now. And we've got about 7 imprints from anything from sci-fi, mil sci-fi, fantasy, all the way out to romance now, which was also something I never thought I'd do. But my wife and Mark Wandry's wife are running that, and it's about to really hit its stride. So CKP's continuing to grow and add some great authors. But I couldn't be any prouder of the ones that I currently have. Like Kevin and hopefully Casey when she shows up. But it's continuing to grow, and I'm looking forward to continuing to build it and get good stories to our readers.
Awesome. Well, you have kind of a signature series. I think the one that a lot of people are most familiar with is the Four Horsemen universe. Can you guys tell us about that and kind of get us into it?
Sure. And that was really kind of one of the starts of Chris Kennedy Publishing was at this little con in, I think, 2015. Mark Wandry came up to me and said, hey, I'd really like to work with you. And I said, well, that's great, but I'm doing this other series and I'm doing this. And, once I get done with that, sure, I'd love to do something. And flash forward a year, I've now tied everything up, and I see him at this con again. And I'm like, hey, Mark, you said you wanted to do something. What'd you have in mind? And he said, oh, well, I thought, you were just blowing me off. I didn't think you really wanted to do it. So I've kind of started on it, and the first book is almost done. I said, oh, well, what is it? And he said, well, it's this book called Cartwright's Cavaliers. And it's a series that I think I'm going to call The Four Horsemen. And I said, oh, well, tell me about it. And he did. And he said, like I said, I've almost got this first book done. And I said, well, send it to me. And he sent it to me, and I read it, most of it that night. And I saw him the next morning, and I said, I'm really sorry. And he's like, oh no, what's wrong? I said, I'm really sorry. I didn't get enough sleep because it kept me up all night. And I really want to do this with you. And he was like, oh my God, yay. And he got all excited, and we got all excited. And So of course we retired to the bar to talk about how this would work and where we were going to go. And the people that he had for a couple of the companies in the Four Horsemen weren't really what I wanted to do. So I said, hey, well, how about this and this? And he said, okay, and I'm going to do this and this. And we got all excited and, okay, well, you do this and then I'll do this and then that, so that's how it started. We left that con with a pretty good idea of what we wanted to do. And we started putting out the books, and we had put out 3 of them, and we wanted to expand the universe a little bit. And so we asked some of our writer friends, hey, would you like to write a short story in the universe? I'm going to put together an anthology. And I was looking for 14. I got 42. Because everybody thought it was a fun universe and wanted to play.
So can we talk a little bit about the universe for people who maybe have never dealt with it before, might be coming at this from a new way? Could you give us kind of a version of that?
Sure. Kevin, why don't you take that one?
So you're basically looking at a future where humans have been brought into a wider galactic union. And there are, I think at the time that humanity is approached, there's 35 or 36 different races that perform mercenary actions across the universe. That's basically how all conflicts are handled, is by proxy, by hiring mercenaries. And so because they realize humanity are good fighters, they've asked humanity to come in and be a member of the mercenary guild. And at that point in time, 100 different human mercenary companies go out on their first missions, what we call the alpha contracts, and only 4 of them come back. And all 4 of those have a horse of some type in their unit heraldry, their symbolism. And so they become known as the 4 Horsemen. And then Cartwright's Cavaliers picks up, Chris, exactly how many years is it after the alpha contract?
It's about 100.
Okay, I was going to say about 100. I just didn't know if it was.
It's just shy of 100, because at 100 we would be able to become full members of the Galactic Union. So we're not yet when Cartwright's Cavaliers starts.
Yep, and so that's where the books pick up and go from there.
So we talk about wars being fought with proxies. How are these wars kind of conducted? What are the means by which they are fought?
Well, like Kevin said, there are 36 different races that fight, and all of them have their own specialties and do their own things. As it turns out, just about all of them are bigger, meaner, faster, stronger, far more vicious than humans. And that's part of the reason why 100 companies go out and only 4 come back. We basically get our butts handed to us, everywhere. And they realize early on, hey, we need something to even the odds. And they start to develop these things called Caspers, Combat Assault System Personal, which is a giant mech suit armed with a magnetic accelerator cannon, lasers, rockets, missiles if needed. Something where we can take a hit, and put down a level of firepower that will take on some of these other races that have, like a giant cockroach with a shell that lasers bounce off. You need something like a good magnetic accelerator cannon to punch through just their natural armor and take them out. And some of the companies have developed along the lines where they do marine type things in space. Others do assault on the planet. And there's a wide variety in the stories in the universe of different warfare units. And I think we've been blessed to have, a number of authors that have that real experience. Like Kevin was an armor officer. I flew for the Navy, so we bring, some of that experience to the telling of the tale and make it, as realistic as possible.
So hold on. We've been invaded. We have been joined by our third guest, Casey. It's wonderful to see you.
Hi, guys. It's good to see you all.
Who is up past her bedtime?
Well past
her bedtime. Casey,
I'm up again.
Could you introduce yourself to the audience and everything real fast?
Absolutely. My name is Casey Ezel. I am a active duty Air Force helicopter pilot who also writes books. I'm the author of in the Four Horsemen universe series. I'm the author of or co-author, I should say, of Assassin and Hunter, along with Marisa Wolf. I also co-wrote Weaver with Mark Wandry, and I have been in every Four Horsemen universe anthology in one form or another that has come out. So,
including editing one of them.
Including editing one of them, yes.
Quite the resume.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, guys. I'm sorry I was late.
No, it's completely understandable. So we've kind of been discussing how the Four Horsemen universe came about and how there are these 37 mercenary races, and humans are now one of them, as I understand it. And they are using Caspers, which are mech suits. When you say giant, how big are you talking about for these mech suits? Like, what size are we looking at?
They started early on at about 10 feet. They're down to about 8.5 feet now. So they're not really giant. It's not like, the Pacific Rim where you're running around with 200-foot tall mechs and things like that. Those would be pretty good targets on, the futuristic warfield.
So, Kevin, how did you come into this universe? How did you find this?
So as Chris was talking about the first anthology, they approached my friend Chuck Gannon about doing the foreword for that anthology. And in the process of that conversation, Chuck asked them if they knew me, and they had not heard of anything that I had done. And Chuck basically suggested to them that I get a shot at the anthology. So I got a email from Chris with the information, and I wrote a short story. Didn't think much about it. It was a short story about a mercenary unit that was basically getting screwed over. And at the end of the story, they come across a peacemaker, one of the essentially law enforcement officers of the Galactic Union, who is a human being and is the ex-wife of the mercenary unit commander. And total throwaway character, in my opinion, until I send in this short story. And so I turn in the short story, and I think it was about 3 hours later, I get an email from Chris. Hey, can you write a book? But we want you to write it about the Peacemaker. And so at that point, I had to kind of go back and recalibrate, and I had to basically create this character. And then as I did so, I had not only created the character, but then Chris and Mark were basically like, create the whole Peacemaker Guild too. So it's been an exploration at that point. So I turned in the first novel, Peacemaker. I think within a day or two after turning in that, Chris wrote me back and said, can you write 2 more? And do you want to be a core author in the Four Horsemen universe? And we've been off and running ever since.
So wait, what's that? What's a core author?
Well, there's 6 of us that are the core authors. That we basically, I don't like to use the word control, but we kind of look over and oversee the universe.
Yeah.
Of course, you have Chris and Mark from the creator standpoint, then myself, Casey is a core author, Marisa Wolf is a core author, and then John Osborne is one of our core authors.
Okay.
And I think
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, Casey, you're on mute, so we're not hearing you anyway. It is kind of a control because a lot of times the core authors have their own little fiefdom that they're in charge of, like Kevin is in charge of the Peacemakers. If anybody wants to do something Peacemaker-ish, it needs to go through Kevin because he knows best what that is and how he wants it run so that, we all drive down the road together. The 6 of us have, the 6 of us are the ones that know where the universe is going and where the storyline is going. And we all have our parts that we're contributing to get us to the end.
Well, Casey, I'll ask you the same question. How did you come into the Four Horsemen universe, and what are your kind of additions to it?
So I came into it via an email. I got an email. It feels like it was like in July of maybe 2016, because I think I first moved to Maryland, and this email, was like, hey, we're doing this cool, sci-fi shared world thing, and we'd like to invite you to contribute a story for the second anthology in it. And I had never heard of the world or the anthology or the people sending the email before I got this email. So I did as one does in such situations, and I contacted my friend Rob Hampson, Dr. Robert Hampson, who is known throughout fandom circles as a speaker to lab animals, among other things, or speaker to lab rats. Or animals, I don't know. Anyway, speaker to somebody, and I emailed him and I was like, "Hey, speaker, what is this? Who are these people? Are they legit?" And speaker wrote back. He said, "Yes, they're very legit. They have they just put their first book out, and it's really great. It's a great success. And I think you should consider doing this. I'm certainly considering doing it as well." So I was like, "Okay, cool." So I wrote back. And I was like, hey, thank you for the opportunity. I'd love to try and contribute something. Along with the email, Chris and Mark had sent along a universe Bible that had a bunch of background information, from which I was able to, we were able to choose and say, hey, I want to write about, this alien race or that alien race or this mercenary company or that mercenary company. I looked at it, and I think initially I was like, so what's up with these peacemakers? And Chris wrote back and he's like, yeah, somebody's already doing that. Pick something else. So I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, all right, well, let's go the other direction. If, what I don't see in this list of races is I don't see anybody who contracts out for murder. And maybe it's a facet of my personality that I think that's a natural inclusion. Right. That's right. Yeah, that's right. So I was like, well, who does the dirty work in the universe? And they're like, I don't know, make it up. And so I decided that, well, the natural fit for that was an alien race of absolutely adorable, absolutely terrifying sociopathic cuddle monsters. So I created the Depic, which some people like to call cat assassins. and I wrote oh my gosh, it's 4 a.m. I wrote a short story called Gilded Cage that was kind of my reverse take on a human adopting an alley cat. In this particular case, a cat assassin adopts an alley human. And that was the beginning. That was the first story that ever featured the Depic. And kind of the same thing happened. I submitted the story, got back the acceptance. They loved it. And I was like, well, that's great. Cool. I just sold another short story. And then very shortly after that, we went to, I think it was RavenCon. And that's where I met Chris and Mark for the first time. And they offered me the opportunity to expand that into a full-length novel. And I was like, I would absolutely love to. But I'm also really busy right now. So do you mind if I bring on some help? And they're like, no, whatever you got to do. So I after that, I basically picked up the phone and called my friend Marisa. This is actually kind of a funny story too, because I sent her the story. Marisa and I had known each other for years and years and years, and we'd written many stories together. And she's often one of the first people to read my work, kind of as an alpha reader. And I sent it to her. And I was like, hey, let me know what you think of this. And she was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I love it. What is this? And I was like, it's a story that, is going in this shared world sci-fi anthology. And she's like, oh, it's super cool. I love it. And I was like, cool. Want to help me write a novel about it? She was like, yeah, let's do that. So that's how Marisa and I together kind of got involved in this Four Horsemen universe shared world thing.
So a lot of connections are basically how this has grown so much. How many people are currently writing in the Four Horsemen universe? Do we know?
I don't.
Is anyone currently not writing in it?
Writing, what do you mean? Continuing to write or have written?
Have written. Let's say have written.
We've now put out. We're about to put out our 9th and 10th anthologies. So the number of people that have written, I suspect, is closing in on 100 people that have written a lot of them, a lot of the authors have been, in most of them. For example, I think right now, I think Casey's missing one and I'm missing one. Terry Mixon and Mark Wandery have been in all of them. But there's been a wide variety of people that have written stories because you say, hey, you want to write a story? And just about anybody I say that to goes, yes, because it's fun. So I would
Chris
just
makes money. Chris sells books that make money.
They do tend to do okay. But
A little bit.
I would say we're probably getting close to 100 different people that have written in the universe now.
So you really do have a large galactic standpoint on this, where there's stories from all different angles coming together in kind of this shared universe. I think that's really interesting. Do you guys have?
Jack, can I talk about that for a second?
Oh, please.
That's one of the things that I think really makes the Four Horsemen universe unique, and that's one of the things that Chris and Mark did at the very beginning that was just so really brilliant. Because we've seen sort of shared world. Things happen before, but nothing on the scale of a galactic, setting that is told from all of these different perspectives. And from the beginning, like Kevin said, Chris and Mark, I said, hey, I want to create this race of alien cat assassins. And they're like, cool, create the race. It's yours. Figure it out. You're now the subject matter expert on it. And we want your perspective on it. And we want you to develop this little corner of the universe. And that becomes your fiefdom. And they do that with everyone. You create something in the Four Horsemen universe and it's yours. It's your baby. And it becomes part of the canon and it becomes part of the overall larger story. And what that does is it has the effect of creating such a rich, tapestry of perspectives and just really gives it a lot of depth to the story and to the world building and to, it's become its own, kind of its own entity, just because it's informed by all those different perspectives. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you guys have a favorite element of the Four Horsemen universe that you didn't create? Something that someone else came up with and you're like, oh, that's cool. I kind of dig on that. I know we've talked about the cat assassins and the peacemakers. Are there other elements that kind of stand out to you where you're like, that was really cool and this is who came up with it?
Oh, that's a tough question because there's so much of it that we love, we fall in love with, and we read each other's stories, and it's like you have that reaction of, why didn't I think of that? But man, I'm really glad that Chris or Mark or Casey or whoever thought of that too. I think the thing that I like the most that's not the stuff that I've done is how the mythology of especially the original four companies has continued to develop. And now that we see other folks bringing in the companies that they're writing, how much depth they bring to that and how those mythologies tie in as far as just being mercenaries on Earth, but not so much at the level of the Four Horsemen, and how, like Casey was saying, they all have a story. And how those stories build to the overall mythology is just really incredible. And when I'm picking up somebody else's work, I'm digging into that because I love to see the thought processes that they've done and the little things that they've done with their companies. Like Ian Malone and Freebird Rising, he created a Major League Baseball team, the Jacksonville Generals. And I just thought that was brilliant. Just the little things that people throw into the stories that are part of the world building and maybe just something they drug out of their self-conscious or their subconscious. I love that stuff. And it really builds the mythologies.
I think my favorite thing that I didn't create is twofold, actually. One of them is I love the concept of the Rachnar, which is an original. It was part of the original book, the original story written by Mark Wandery. Sorry, my headphones falling out. And yeah, I won't spoil it, but there's just some very cool concepts going on with how these things operate and what they are and where they're from. And I love that whole meta piece of the storyline. So I love the Rachnar, number one. And then number two, that same speaker, Dr. Rob Hampson, who is, he is a
He's a brain
research
scientist.
neuroscientist. Yeah,
Yeah.
research neuroscientist. He created these characters called, or this race called the Rogol, which or he developed, I should say. I think Mark originally mentioned them, but he developed this race of aliens called the Rogol that are they're also like, they get in your brain and move things around and shift things, and it's just so perfect to have, you know, a man with, you know, those academic credentials and knowledge of that caliber, taking that knowledge and playing in our fun little world in a really cool, fun way. And Speaker's stories are just, they're fantastic. They're some of the best ones in the world, in my opinion.
And that was kind of what I was talking about earlier. You know, not only do we have armor guys writing armor stories and aviators, and you know, we've got a brain scientist that's writing the brain scientist stuff. You know, so it doesn't get, you know, a whole lot more legitimate than that. I think my favorite thing is playing with other people's aliens. You know, somebody comes up with a cool alien and I'm like, oh, you know, I could use that like this, and then that would cause that. And, you know, and it's getting all of the new things in and getting to play with them where you don't have to come up with everything. And I absolutely love it when the 6 core authors sit down together and start going, well, you know, I want to do this. Okay, well, you do that, then I'm going to do this. Oh, well, that's awesome, because then I can, you know, and all six of us are jumping around and, you know, getting excited and really psyching ourselves up. And we really do get excited about writing, you know, stories in the universe and where we're going and how we can interact and tell great stories and, you know, keep people hooked. The series has over 50 books now, and people are like, when's the next one coming? You're only putting out 3 next month? Well, what the heck's up with that? Why not 4? You know, so it's really cool.
So we've talked about kind of the shared world. We've talked about how many people you've got working on it. Where do you guys think, if someone's never read any of them, where should they start?
Cartwright's Cavaliers. It's the book that was meant to be the first in the series. It gives you a good grounding in everything, you know, and that's really the way to start. You could do Fistful of Credits if you like short stories, and because that gives you a wide variety of looks at different things, including that Peacemaker chick, and you know, so that would be mine. I don't know what you two think.
Yeah, that's what I recommend to people too, is read Cartwright's first to get kind of the basic background on, you know, how the universe works and why it works the way that it does. And then after Cartwright's, either continue on to Asmoran Solutions and read the first 4 novels, or read Cartwright's and then read Fistful of Credits, because you get the initial
cool pilot in Asmoran Solutions too.
Yeah.
Just pretty cool.
Yeah, she does all right. And then yeah, Fistful of Credits gets that broader look. So
Yep. Same recommendation.
All right, so we just touched on one of my favorite topics ever, which are red shirts. And if you've never dealt with red shirts before, I'm going to go ahead and give you some inside pool to the listening audience. Red shirts are when an author takes someone they know and inserts them into the book, often, but not necessarily to die a horrible death, hence the red shirt title. It doesn't have to be a red shirt you did, but do any of y'all have a favorite red shirt?
Yeah, so I'll start. We have a fan. I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but that was kind of the butt of the joke. Paul Vatikanatovic, or whatever it is, I can't remember. But I ended up writing him as a red shirt in Standard Fall, and because he is essentially a pararescueman and he's on board a drop ship that's being used as a medevac, I gave him a call sign of Alphabet. And so that has now stuck for him. And that was the favorite one that I've created. And it's kind of fun to just kind of see how those things continue to go.
So my favorite red shirt in the Four Horsemen universe is probably Yvonne Jacobs.
Yeah,
So-
close second.
Yeah, she's one of the other things. So one of the other aspects of the Four Horsemen universe that, as it has developed, that I don't think any of us could have possibly predicted is the fan side of things. But every book is a conversation between the reader and the writer, right? Well, the readers of the Four Horsemen universe have created a fan group that is based on the mercenary company structure, within the universe. So these, people get together, they form a mercenary company, and that becomes a chapter of the overall Four Horsemen universe fan club. And Yvonne is a member of one of these mercenary companies, and she is larger than life. She is, just loud and proud, and just a really, really great, fun, down-to-earth person. And her red shirting in I don't even remember which book it was, but she has a classic red shirt moment, Staff Sergeant Jacobs, and what's so great about it is that she read that, and then she has since taken that identity, and that has become her persona within the fan club, and it's just been a lot of fun to see and watch. And she'll show up at a con with a dead, with like a stuffed cockroach to represent the Goka that she went down swinging in her red shirt scene. So yeah, that's my favorite within the Four Horsemen universe. My favorite red shirt that I've ever done was outside of this particular universe, and it involved a riverboat captain that may or may not have exploded his ship in order to keep it from falling.
Terrible.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, Chris.
We wouldn't be doing red shirts justice in the Four Horsemen universe if we didn't mention Summercorn, Chris Summercorn, who at LibertyCon, as all this was getting started, both Mark and I offered up something for the charity auction. We said, hey, we'll redshirt somebody. Chris Summercorn bought both of them. He won both auctions. So then we had to figure out how were we going to trade him back and forth, because red shirts are supposed to die. If he dies in my book, how do I give him to Mark? So we came up with a way of doing it where we tried to make him a lovable but not always totally competent person, who doesn't do wrong, but because he focuses so much on one area, some of the other things escape him, and so the company owners are like, I don't think we need him anymore, and so he goes through all of the Four Horsemen, but then he finally gets a chance to go out and do good things, and he earns himself a name and saves the company. So he goes out with a bang, literally. I think my favorite one though would be Dan Walker, who I put in as a red shirt for a short story, and all I wanted him for was this short story, and he was supposed to die, but he didn't end up dying in it. He ended up becoming the leader of that unit, and then that unit fell apart, and he ended up with one of the Four Horsemen, and he moved up all the way to just about XO of the company before he finally died. He was only supposed to last one short story, and he ended up in about 6 or 8 books. Jerk.
That's a lot of ink. That's a lot of ink for him to take up. So if somebody was interested and they felt like, they read the universe, they kind of got a feel for it, and they wanted to write something, how would they go about that?
Pretty much the way both of the other two authors here, we do open anthologies at least a couple times a year. And that's really probably the thing that I'm most proud of for the Four Horsemen universe is we let our fans write stories. And we have published, I think we've been the first story for 9 or 10 people now. I know in the next one that's coming out on May 1st, there are 2 people that have never published anything before, and one that, is his first science fiction. And then I know Kevin has a couple new authors in his, and the ability to get people their first story, I think is like I said, something that I'm really proud of, and I think is one of the beautiful things about the Four Horsemen universe.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome when you have fans that come up to you at a show or a convention and they ask about writing in the universe, and I'd really like to do that, but I don't know how. Well, we have the anthologies, and if you're interested, just sign up for the mailing list, and you get the information firsthand, and then you can try it and see what happens.
So, very good for like first-time authors and other people who might be interested in coming in. One thing that I think we always in science fiction, a main aspect is technology, and we kind of talked about the Casper. But is there any other kind of technology in the universe that you guys kind of think is a standout, something that you really appreciate from a writer's point of view, and everything else that you really enjoyed playing with?
Since I'm working on one of Kevin's books right now, I think one of the neat things that he came up with are the skiffs, which he's used quite a bit. You want to talk about something like that? Because that's totally you, Kevin.
It's basically kind of a conglomeration of not so much a tank and not so much an armored personnel carrier, but some just type of medium grade troop mover that's armed and can be used for reconnaissance and whatever else. And I've used it now with a couple of different books, and it came in well. It just was something I needed to fit in, because I didn't think the enemy would necessarily have tanks in all their their arsenals and whatnot. So how would they focus on moving people around the battlefield? So that was something that I'll be honest, I created without any real thought. It was, there just needs to be something that moves the enemy from one place to another so they can be engaged and potentially moved by fire. And I just came up with it, and it's one of those things that's kind of stuck.
Yeah, I really like one of the things I really enjoy working with when I'm writing stories in the Four Horsemen universe is the way that interstellar travel happens. And this was all Mark, I believe, who basically set up the idea that, you can travel these great distances. I'm going to use the wrong words, but this hyperspace travel, but there are different levels of hyperspace, and it's the mechanics of how that works in this universe is very cool, and it's based on some real actual hard science, which is fun, and it provides an interesting challenge for us as the writer to abide by, because it's not just space magic that works because the writer needs it to work for a plot point, and
so. Wavium.
Yes. And it's funny. I mean, I write about cats, alien cats that can turn invisible and talk with people. And even that, like, I had to have, it was a requirement that I have an actual, no kidding, scientific explanation that we could at least point to and say, well, if this particular theory of matter is correct, then what follows, is based on the assumption that is correct. And so even something as crazy sounding as talking cats turning invisible is actually really based on some legit hard science. So.
And that was going to be the one that I brought up, was the way you did that. The way you made, the invisible, they're not really invisible, but invisible. The way you did that, Casey, I think is really cool. And yes, you're right. Mark is the one that is responsible for hyperspace. And I think that, the neat thing about it is that we've tried to stay as close to real life as we know it, with, taking a look at science and, okay, where's this going to go? How might this work? You don't have artificial gravity. If you want to have gravity in a ship, you got to spin the ship, or accelerate the ship, or do something. And I think that we've been pretty true to that. The science has been good, which, I'm pretty excited about. Nobody really says, "Hey, that doesn't work because of this thing," and, "Oh, that's wrong." You don't get that, which you do with, a lot of other series where you go, "Okay, but you're cheating." Aside from, having a hyperspace at all, which, okay, we don't know, but we need it so that the books don't take 20 years to get, ships from one place to another. Aside from that, the science is pretty much the way we know the science is.
I think one of the other aspects of the science that I really appreciate too is how we look at, like Casey was talking about with the Depic and the idea that they can turn invisible, or the Goka with the shell that repels lasers. That xenobiology is a lot of fun to develop, because you start looking at, you would think, right, these aliens as human. Well, we don't intend to, and sometimes they have the certain mannerisms that they pick up, and I think we do a really good job of talking about how, is that what the humans say, for example, or something along those lines, as they're talking, but exploring their biology and how they react differently to certain instances, whether it be like the climate or whatever else. There's a sequence in the next book I have. I don't know if you're there, Chris, with your read through yet, but they're talking about walking through snow, and the two characters have a very different take on walking through snow. So just being able to explore that stuff too is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the psychology too, the xenopsychology. I mean, that's basically the entirety of the premise behind Weaver that Mark and I wrote is, what does it take to make, one of the great villain races in the Four Horsemen universe is the Tortantulas, which are essentially, imagine a 10-legged spider the size of a Volkswagen, that just wants to eat you, with a psychotic chipmunk sitting on the back of it with a big ass hand cannon. And that's, you have the Tortantula Flatar pairing. And so, the question that we wanted to answer in Weaver is, what makes, how do you make that pairing happen? What is the psychology behind this? And it isn't necessarily human psychology, but we had to make it human enough that it would be relatable to the audience. And that was a very fun exercise. Weaver is one of my favorite books that I've written, and it's for that reason.
And she hears this all the time. "You made me like spiders. I hate you."
Yeah, I have this really annoying tendency of taking something yucky and bad and scary and trying to make it, kind of adorable.
She took one of the other villainous races and turned them nice. Imagine the werewolf that ate grandma, all of a sudden becoming wow, I was pulling for the Besquith. I hate that you made me do that.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like the purple don't care bears too, our Ugar, basically, 2 to 3 meter tall grizzly bears. And that was a lot of fun to kind of get in that headspace too, and how they would react to certain things. So it's fun.
And I will say that, Kevin kind of owns the Ugar, and Casey has developed the Besquith, which were the wolves, and come up with the whole backstory for how does this society work, so that that they're consistent when you see them. It's not okay, one's really bad, one does this, one does that, but there's no coherent society. A lot of the more developed races have their own societies and how they work. Kevin also did a lot with the Minsha. So it's neat to have that ability, where there are enough people working on this world or this universe that, other people can be responsible for things. You don't have to do it all. I own, a couple races. Everybody owns a couple races, and because of that, you can get a little further in depth with them and make them more relatable. Give an inside view of them, which I think is really cool.
So I know we don't want to give too much away, but are there any hints that we can talk about where we're headed with this story? Are there any juicy tidbits for the fans? I know they're sitting there waiting, pen and paper.
I will say we have not seen the last of the planet Katash, which is the Depik homeworld.
Nice.
And I would say from the Peacemaker storyline, the big question is, where is Jessica Francis's father? And after the next book that comes out on the 15th of May, everybody will know exactly where he is.
Well, just a few short weeks away then. Yeah. Chris, anything you want to hint towards for the fans and everything?
I do not, because I will. How about this? I will say, people keep wanting to know where Black and White, one of the stories, Black and White, where that went, where that unit went, where that, it's basically, it was a YA novel set in the Four Horsemen universe that had uplifted dolphins and killer whales. People keep saying, hey, when's the next book coming out on that? Mark has already, has an idea of where he's going with that. But if you couldn't already tell from the last couple books that we wrote, you'll probably see them again.
All righty. So plenty of things are brewing, but all behind mysterious curtains. I like it. I'm sure the fans both love and hate it. Yeah. as they should. Well, let's get to the plug point. Let's go through, guys, plug what you're currently working on, what you've currently got out for sale and everything, and let the people know where they can find you.
Ladies first.
She's muted. She doesn't know.
I couldn't find my microphone. Sorry. Okay. Let's see. My next Four Horsemen piece that is coming out is in the next anthology called The Gates of Hell. Is that right?
Gates of Hell. Gates
of Hell. Yeah. So I have a story in The Gates of Hell, and this was for the first time. So for a universe based on mercenary combat, I have yet to write a mercenary combat story, or I have yet to publish one. That changes with Gates of Hell. So you get to see how Casey Ezel does mercenary combat, and those of you who are military history fans will probably recognize the genesis of this story. At least I hope you do, because it was a lot of fun to write. So that's my next Four Horsemen piece that's coming out. For non-Four Horsemen stuff, I'm currently working on the third novel in my Psyche of War universe. That's the one about the psychic chicks who hang around with dudes who fight other people. This one is called Skies to Conquer. It is set in Vietnam. There will be Hueys involved. That's how I roll, And then, so that's my current work in progress. I also have, I think mine is out in June. Is that right, Chris, for Promises?
It is 17th of June. Yes, June 17th.
Okay, that's the first I've heard that date. Cool. So on 17th of June, Promises will come out. That is my novella in Chuck Gannon's Kane Reardon universe, the Terran Republic universe, published by Chris's Beyond Terra imprint. And that is another take on Shared World, where basically Chuck Gannon, who I always embarrass him when I say this, but I really do consider him to be one of the modern masters of science fiction, particularly military science fiction. But yeah, Chuck Gannon has invited Kevin and me and Chris and Mark and Griffin Barber and Mike Massa to come play in his backyard. And so we've all written novellas or are writing novellas, and Kevin's just came out, right?
Yeah,
Didn't yours come out on Monday? Yeah.
Monday.
Yeah. So it's Kevin's is called Obligations. It came out on Monday. That's the second one. Mike Mass's was first. That was Shakes. And then next up we have Man Eater by Griff, and then Promises will be out in June. Followed by, I'm doing this off the top of my head. I'm hoping I can remember them all. Followed by Wave Off by Chris, which you just finished. No?
Pearl is first.
Oh, Pearl and then Wave Off. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Cool. So Pearl is by Mark, and then Chris is cleaning it up with Wave Off. So yeah, that's what's on deck for me. And then there's some romance stuff too. For the Wild
Let's hear
Stallions
about
imprint.
that. I'm way more interested.
You want to hear
in
about the
that.
romance stuff? Okay. So Chris also has an imprint called Wild Stallions Press, run by Sheila Kennedy, the lovely Sheila Kennedy, and the equally lovely Joy Wandry. And the first anthology called Flights of Fantasy is coming out May 8th, I want to say.
Yep.
And I have that one is a urban fantasy romance anthology, and I have a story in it that is it is a kind of a YA-ish. I characterize it as a sweet romance, so no sex on the page. It's appropriate for teenagers, right? In my story, death of the Four Horsemen, death is a 16-year-old girl. Like this chick wakes up, and not only is she a 16-year-old cheerleader, but she's also death, the Four Horsemen, or one of the horsemen one day. And so she has to find her the other three horsemen, and also navigate the waters of her first love, while being a harbinger of the apocalypse, of the eschaton. So so that's my story, Thus with a Kiss, in Flights of Fantasy, which comes out May 8th. And then my friend Nico Murray and I actually wrote a novel a couple years ago, and sent it to the editor-sees, and they picked it up to be Wild Stallions' first full-length novel that'll come out sometime after Flights of Fantasy. I'm not sure exactly when. Okay, May 29th. And that one is called Over the Night Horizon. And if I had to describe that one, I would call it a steampunk vampire jewel heist romance story.
I'm in.
Yeah.
You got it.
That one is a little bit steamier than my YA.
So
story,
we will see some flight suit ripper writing from you in some suit. Not quite bodice ripper, but
well, yeah, sure. I mean, yeah.
Well, there is a men in uniform one coming up, so
yeah.
I know.
I think you've just been committed, Casey.
I was like, I don't have a story for that one, Chris.
Not yet.
Not yet. Kevin, what about you? What do you have coming up for us there?
So like Casey said, I just had Obligations come out in the Kane Riordan universe. Probably one of the most challenging things I've ever written, which was a lot of fun to do. Then on the first, we've got the Gates of Hell anthology. I have a story in that with a friend of both of all of ours, Casey Moores, where we got to kind of go back in time a little bit with the mercenary company I was talking about from the first anthology. We see them in action right after Jessica has departed them on one of their last missions. So that's going to be a lot of fun to do. That one is called Freedom of Maneuver. Then on the 15th is my next Four Horsemen novel, Fields of Fire, which picks up right after Death Angel and pursues the search for Snowman. Absolutely no spoilers. That was one of the most emotional books I've ever written. So that was a lot of fun to do too. And then after that, at the end of the month, is Set the Terms, which is a Peacemaker-focused anthology in the Four Horsemen universe that is edited by myself and my longtime first reader and editor, Maya Cleave. And we've got 14 stories there, plus an incredible introduction from Casey that broaden out the Peacemakers. And I have a feeling there may be a couple of those stories that actually may spawn some books later on, too, because there's some really good stuff in there. Outside of Four Horsemen, I'm working on right now a sequel to my novel Super Sync, which was an Elmore Leonard style crime novel in space. And I'm working on that with my friend and longtime collaborator, Pete Alden. little do people know that the universe that I actually wrote Super Sync in has actually been created prior to in a short story that Pete and I did called Illegal, that was first published in Australia in 2013 in the Andromeda Spaceways in Flight magazine. And so when Super Sync came out, he sent me a note and said, "This sounds familiar." I said, "Yep, we're going back to the belt." So he's gonna be involved with that. We're a couple chapters in now. No real timetable on when that's going to go through. Later this summer, I'll be picking up with both Kevin Steverson and Quincy Allen to continue our storylines in the Four Horsemen universe as well. So it's going to be a busy year.
And Chris, I'm sure you've got a lot working up, but try and.
Well, in the Four Horsemen universe, I have a story in the Gates of Hell. I also have a story in the Peacemaker anthology at the end of the month. Mark and I are continuing to write in the main storyline, and so you'll see plenty of that. My original series that I wrote, my original sci-fi series in the Theogony, when I completed the first trilogy, readers said, "No, you need to write more. It needs to be a trilogy of trilogies, like Star Wars, only better." So I'm the second book in the third and final trilogy comes out May 8th, in addition to Flights of Fantasy. So it's going to be a contest because my wife Sheila also has a story in Flights of Fantasy that's out on the 8th. So we're both launching the same day, and it's like, who's going to outsell the other? Which I'm already about ready to concede, because she's got, in addition to herself, she's got Casey and Marisa and, a bunch of other great authors. And so it's 14 to 1, 12 to 1, and I'm going to get hammered, but I'm not going to go down without a fight. Anyway, so I got that. I've got another novel coming in the Fallen World that I wrote with Chris Woods, The Island of Dr. LaRue. Which, if you've seen the cover, looks kind of reminiscent of Island of Dr. Moreau. So you can make some similarities there. Writing. Love the story that I have in Chuck Gannon's universe, the Murphy's Lawless series, Wave Off, which hopefully will tie up all of the 5 stories before it. It is without a doubt my favorite ending of any that I've written. So.
Well,
lots of good stuff coming, and I'm excited about everything CKP is putting out.
All right. Well, guys, I'd like to thank you for coming on for our initial show. It really helps to start something off with such a great group of people and everything. And thank you for coming out, and thanks for telling us a lot about this universe. And I hope we've got some people rushing to Amazon right now. Lord knows they've got the time on their hands.
Absolutely.
We have been flashing those covers up on the screen for the viewers at home, so they can see what those books look like. Those are awesome covers, and yeah, you need to
awesome.
get them.
Great.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All righty.
So.
Well, guys, to the listening audience, thank you very much, and we will see you guys next week.
And let us know in the comments what you like about this and what you want to see in the future. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe, and it will take